In this lecture, we're going to be talking about sex-linked traits. So traits which are linked to a particular sex. These traits or genes are located on the sex chromosomes, and that's why we call them sex-linked traits. Remember that the sex chromosomes are X and Y, where the genotype for females, certainly in mammals, is going to be XX, and the genotype for males is XY. Importantly, many of the sex-linked traits which we see are carried on the X chromosome. So they are carried by the female, and this is what we mean by something being carried through on the female. Okay, so let's have a look at the sex chromosomes in fruit flies. And this is what they would look like. We have the XX chromosome, which is the female, the two larger ones, and the XY chromosome, which is the male. The X being the female chromosome, the Y being the male, which is actually smaller. And what we're going to do is we're going to have a look at the eye color in fruit flies, which is actually carried by the female. Right, so here is the problem. Eye color in fruit flies. If we have a red-eyed male and a white-eyed female, so that is the red eye carried on the X. Remember, eye color is a sex-linked trait which is carried by the female, so it can only be on the X chromosome. So the male has got a red eye, and that is XRY, and the female has got white eyes, and they're both carried on the X chromosome, but white eyes are recessive. Homozygous recessive, right? So remember that the Y chromosome does not carry the traits. So red eyes would look like this. Red eye would be heterozygous. White eye would be homozygous. Okay, remembering XY is the male, XX is the female. So let's lay out our Punnett square and have a look at what it would look like. We take the sex chromosomes as we would expect from the cross above. We would get something like this. So what is the solution? Well, the solution would look like this. And you lay them out, do your typical Punnett square, and we would get 50% would be red-eyed females. Remember that it's carried on the female X chromosome, and 50% would be white-eyed males. If you can have a look at the bottom row of the Punnett square. So 50% being red-eyed females, the top line, 50% white-eyed males. And this is very important when we have a look at things like eye color in males and females. Another very important point to consider, which is linked to sex-linked traits, is in female carriers. So in a sex-linked trait like hemophilia, women are the carriers and men show or have the phenotype for it. And one of the classic examples of this was in Alexis, who was the son of Tsar Nicholas and his queen Alexandra. And it's very interesting because Alexandra was the daughter of, or descendant of, I should say, of Queen Victoria and her husband Albert. And now, very interestingly, through work that has been conducted, research that has been conducted, it was determined that Queen Victoria carried the gene for hemophilia. She married Albert, and they had numerous children, but one of their children, Alice, continued to carry the gene, and she then got married and had Alexandra, who then eventually, as was the custom in those times, was married off to Tsar Nicholas of Russia, and one of their children, Alexis, was one of the very famous hemophiliacs of our time. And so it's very important to remember that often in sex-linked chromosomes, it's the sex-linked traits, I should say, it's carried by the female, and sometimes in certain instances it is then only expressed in men. such as in hemophilia. Now that finishes off our section on inheritance, Mendelian genetics and inheritance. But if you go to the faculty folder, you'll find that there is the full PowerPoint without any narrations. And at the end of that PowerPoint, you will find some genetic problems, which I would strongly encourage you to try out and do. The solutions are also provided, so you can try your hand at the genetic problems, remembering that you should concentrate on issues like monohybrid crosses, dihybrid crosses, and test your ability to figure out what the solutions would be before going and having a look at the PowerPoint. I hope these have been useful, and we will talk again soon.